Everyone was afraid of the millionaire until the waitress shut him up in front of everyone. The silence at Damien Blackwood's table was absolute. All the noise of the expensive restaurant Elysium flowed around this place as if afraid to disturb it. The name of this man was whispered in the city. He slowly looked up from his plate of steak and looked at the young waitress. Damien Blackwood said with deadly calm, "You consider this an acceptable level of service." The girl's name was Ayla. She stood straight, not looking away. "I believe I fulfilled your order exactly, Mr. Blackwood," she replied in an even voice that showed no fear. He smiled, but his cold gray eyes remained serious. "I asked for a medium-rare steak, and you brought me a medium," he said, enunciating each word clearly. "This is either gross incompetence or outright disrespect. So which shall I choose as the reason?" Ayla didn't flinch. "I wouldn't choose either, sir," she replied. "I personally checked the order in the kitchen. Perhaps you simply have a different idea of how well done a steak should be than our chef." At that moment, the restaurant manager, pale as a sheet, was already rushing toward the table, ready to offer any apology. But he froze halfway there when he heard what happened next. Damien Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "So you're saying that I, a man who dines at the finest restaurants in the world, don't know anything about meat?" he asked insinuatingly. "And you, a girl who serves plates for tips, are an expert on the subject." Ayla took a barely perceptible breath. "I am saying that you received exactly what you asked for," she said clearly, her voice growing stronger. "But if, for some reason, it does not suit your mood, that is a completely different problem. And I'm afraid the solution is not on our restaurant's menu." But to understand how a young waitress dared to do such a thing, we need to go back a few weeks to the day when the name Damien Blackwood was first mentioned at the general staff meeting at Elysium. Damien Blackwood wasn't just a millionaire, he was a predator, a corporate raider who built his empire on the ruins of other companies. People feared him not for his money, but for his mind and his absolute ruthlessness. He was a man of total control, a perfectionist to the core, who demanded perfection in everything around him. For him, the world was divided into tools and obstacles. People in this world were just resources. His visits to expensive restaurants were not an act of relaxation, but part of his work, a public performance where he asserted his power. He found the slightest flaw, be it a speck of dust on a glass or a wrong note in the sommelier's voice, and turned it into a public humiliation. He never raised his voice. His weapons were his icy calm, his quiet voice, and his words, which cut like a scalpel. People were fired after his visits. The Elysium restaurant was the pinnacle of the city's gastronomic life, a place where politicians and celebrities dined. Working here was considered prestigious, but the demands were extremely high. Ayla had been working here for 6 months. She was not a naive girl dreaming of a prince. She was a fighter. Every dollar she earned in this restaurant went toward paying the medical bills for her younger brother Finn, who suffered from a rare blood disease. Ayla had seen enough hardship in her life not to be dazzled by expensive interiors and arrogant customers. She had a keen sense of self-worth and a quiet, stubborn strength that many mistook for naivety. The news that Damien Blackwood had booked a table spread through the restaurant like wildfire. The manager, Monsieur Legrand, called everyone together for an emergency meeting. "Gentlemen, next Friday we will be visited by Mr. Blackwood," he announced, his voice trembling slightly. "I won't explain what that means. It means that everything must be more than just perfect. Everything must be beyond perfect. The glasses, the tablecloths, the temperature of the wine, the speed of service. The slightest mistake, and not only the person responsible will suffer, but the reputation of the entire establishment." He glanced at the tense faces of the waiters. "Who will be serving him?" he asked. And in the suspended silence, the question sounded like a sentence. No one volunteered. Mark, the best waiter, suddenly remembered his doctor's appointment. Sophie, experienced and always confident, lowered her gaze. Serving Blackwood meant voluntarily stepping onto the scaffold. Ayla was silent. She desperately needed the money. It was said that Blackwood, if he was satisfied, would leave a tip equal to a month's salary, but the risk was too great. However, Monsieur Legrand had already made his decision. His gaze fell on her. "Ayla," he said, "you have worked for us long enough to understand our standards. You are attentive and calm, I think you can handle it. It was not a question, but an order. To refuse would be cowardly and would most likely mean losing her job. All right, Monsieur Legrand, she replied quietly, feeling the sympathetic and relieved glances of her colleagues. I'll serve Mr. Blackwood's table. For the next week, Ayla prepared for this dinner as if it were the most important exam of her life. She studied all of Blackwood's known preferences. He drank only a certain brand of still mineral water, served at a strictly defined temperature. He preferred wines from one particular region of France. He hated it when waiters were too pushy, but despised having to wait. She had watched him from a distance during his previous visits, which she had witnessed. She saw him fire a young sommelier for serving wine half a degree too warm. She heard him quietly reprimand a hostess for smiling what he considered insincerely. She understood that it wasn't about the food or the service, it was about power. He enjoyed breaking people. On D-Day, the tension in the restaurant was palpable. Ayla checked her appearance several times. Her uniform was immaculately ironed, her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and there was not a single extra detail. When Damien Blackwood entered the room, the conversations at the neighboring tables grew quieter. He moved with predatory grace, his expensive suit fitting him like a second skin. He sat down at his table and, without looking at Ayla, began to study the menu, although everyone knew he would order the same thing. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," said Ayla as she approached the table. "My name is Ayla, and I will be your server tonight." He didn't even look up. "Water in the wine list," he said. Ayla brought everything with perfect timing. She placed the glass and bottle on the table so that the label was facing him. She waited silently for him to make his choice. "Chateau Margaux, 1995, he said, still not looking at her. "And a ribeye steak. Medium rare. Make sure your chef understands what that means." "Of course, sir," Ayla replied and withdrew to the kitchen. The kitchen was a scene of military discipline. The head chef, a renowned and usually loud Frenchman, worked silently and intently. He personally selected the best cut of meat. "Tell Mr. Blackwood that his steak will be a work of art," he said to Ayla when the dish was ready. Ayla placed the plate in front of the millionaire. He glanced at it appraisingly, then picked up his knife and fork and made a single cut right down the middle of the steak. He looked at the cut, and then that predatory, anticipatory smile appeared on his face. The show had begun. Ayla's last sentence fell into a deafening silence. Monsieur Legrand froze halfway to the table, his face expressing genuine horror. The other waiters, frozen at their posts, looked at Ayla as if she were crazy. To challenge Damien Blackwood at his own game was tantamount to suicide. Everyone waited for the inevitable, cold, and cruel punishment. Damien Blackwood stared at Ayla for a long time. His gray eyes, usually like shards of ice, studied her face as if he were seeing her for the first time. He was looking for fear, trembling, remorse, but he found nothing but calm, almost defiant confidence. And then, the unthinkable happened. The corners of his lips slowly curled upward, and he laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but a quiet, deep laugh that was even more frightening than his anger. "Unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "Just unbelievable. My mood, that is." "You're a psychologist, Miss, Ayla, sir," she reminded him. "Ayla," he repeated, savoring the name. "So what do you say about my mood, Ayla? What diagnosis do you give me?" He was playing with her like a cat with a mouse, and the entire room held its breath as it watched the game unfold. "I don't give diagnoses, sir," she replied, maintaining her composure. "But I can see that you're not looking for dinner, but confirmation that you're right, and you're willing to ruin the evening not only for yourself, but for everyone around you." Monsieur Legrand let out a quiet groan and closed his eyes. He was already mentally writing his resignation letter. Damien Blackwood stopped smiling. He picked up his knife and fork again, cut off another small piece of steak, chewed it slowly, and looked at Ayla. "You're right," he said unexpectedly. "It's cooked to perfection. My compliments to the chef." He paused and took a sip of water. "And my compliments to you, Ayla," he continued in his quiet, mesmerizing voice. "You've just won a very dangerous game, or you've just made the first move in it. Time will tell." He finished his steak in complete silence, without saying another word. Ayla served him with her usual impeccable politeness, clearing the plates and refilling his glass. When dinner was over, he motioned her over. "The check," he said curtly. Ayla brought a leather folder. He placed his black credit card inside without looking at the amount. When Ayla returned with the check for him to sign, he scribbled his name and stood up. "Thank you for your company, Ayla," he said, looking her straight in the eye. "I hope to see you next time." With these words, he turned and left the restaurant, leaving behind a trail of fear, confusion, and a wad of cash on the table. As soon as the door closed behind him, Monsieur Legrand rushed over to Ayla. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, his face red from the stress. "Do you even realize what you've done? He could have closed this restaurant with one phone call. But he didn't," Ayla said calmly, picking up the folder and money from the table. He ate his steak and paid the bill. "He's playing with you," the manager persisted. "People like him don't forgive insolence. He'll come back to destroy you. I'm warning you. If you cause any trouble for this establishment, you'll be fired on the spot." He left, leaving Ayla alone. Her colleagues avoided her, casting frightened and envious glances at her. She opened the folder. On the check, next to the signature, was a note. "For your courage." And underneath it was a stack of $100 bills. She quickly counted them, $5,000. That was what she earned in 3 months. That was enough to pay for a new experimental treatment for Finn. Her hands trembled slightly as she put the money in her pocket. It wasn't joy, but a cold relief mixed with anxiety. She had won a battle, but she felt that the war was just beginning. After her shift, she didn't go home. She went to the city hospital, to the hematology ward. Her younger brother's room was small and bright. 12-year-old Finn sat on the bed, thin and pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw his sister. "You came," he smiled. "I promised," Ayla replied, sitting down on the edge of his bed and taking a book out of her bag. "Ready for the new chapter about Captain Blake's adventures?" "He'll defeat the space pirates," Finn asked confidently. "He always does," Ayla confirmed, hugging him. She read to him for almost an hour until he began to fall asleep. Looking at his peaceful face, at the IV slowly pumping life into his veins, Ayla felt her own resolve grow as hard as steel. She would fight for him, against anyone, even a monster like Damian Blackwood. That money wasn't just a tip, it was ammunition for her war. At that very moment, a black sedan with no license plates glided silently through the night city. In the back seat, Damian Blackwood stared at the lights of the skyscrapers that were part of his empire. He dialed a number on his phone. "Julian," he said when the call was answered. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," came the emotionless voice of his assistant. "I was served by a waitress at Elysium today," Damian began. "Her name is Ayla. You'll find out her last name. I want to know everything about her, where she lives, who she hangs out with, her family, her habits. I need every detail of her life, every little thing." "You need information to pressure her, sir?" Julian clarified. Damian Blackwood paused for a moment. "No," he replied, surprising himself. "I need information to understand her. Find her weak spot, Julian. I want to know what makes her so strong." He ended the call and leaned back in his seat. For the first time in many years, he was intrigued. In his carefully calibrated world, where all people were predictable pawns, a figure had appeared who was not playing by the rules, and he was going to find out what her rules were. 2 days later, Julian, Damian's impeccable and inconspicuous assistant, entered his panoramic office on the top floor of Blackwood Tower. He silently placed a thin gray folder on the black glass desk. "Information on Ayla Regan, sir," he reported. Damian didn't immediately tear his gaze away from the city spread out below him like a submissive map. "So fast, Julian?" he asked. "I hope the quality didn't suffer from the speed." "Not at all, sir," replied the assistant. "Her life turned out to be surprisingly simple. No dark spots, no skeletons in the closet. Everything is on the surface." Damian gestured to him to sit down, a sign of exceptional favor. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a brief biography. Everything was exactly as Julian had said, simple and uninteresting. She rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town, was unmarried, and had almost no friends. Most of her modest salary went to pay the bills. "This is all boring, Julian," Damian said, flipping through the pages. "I asked you to find her weak spot, not a report for the tax office." "Flip to the last section, sir," the assistant advised. "I think you'll find what you're looking for." Damian turned the page. The section was titled Family. There was only one line. Younger brother, Finnegan Regan, 12 years old. Diagnosis: aplastic anemia. Requires expensive treatment and possible bone marrow transplant. Attached below were copies of medical bills for astronomical sums. Damien stared at the photo of the boy attached to the report, a pale child with huge, serious eyes, so similar to his sister's. He looked up at Julian. "There it is," he said quietly. "Her strength and her weakness in one face. She's not working for tips, Julian. She's working for his life." "That's right, sir," confirmed the assistant. "She's desperately looking for money. She tried to get a loan from several banks, but they all turned her down. The amount is too large for a waitress with no collateral." Damien closed the folder. A plan formed in his head instantly. He knew how he could use this information. He could offer her money, buy her, make her his puppet. It was his usual method, foolproof and effective. But for some reason, it seemed too crude, too predictable. This girl was different. She hadn't bowed to his pressure when only her job was at stake. Would she bow when something more was at stake? "Book me a table at Elysium for tomorrow night," he ordered. "The same one, and make sure I'm served by Ayla Regan." "You're going to make her an offer she can't refuse, sir," Julian suggested. "I'm going to continue our game," Damien replied, a cold, gambling gleam appearing in his eyes. "Only now do I know what pieces she has on her side of the board." The next evening, when Ayla saw a familiar name on the reservation list, she felt a chill run through her. Monsieur Legrand approached her with a martyred expression on his face. "He's come back for you," he whispered. "I told you, be a good girl, Ayla. Smile, agree with everything, don't argue. Maybe he'll spare you." "I'll just do my job, Monsieur Legrand," she replied, though her heart was pounding with foreboding. When Damien Blackwood appeared in the dining room, he was alone. He sat down at a table, and when Ayla approached, he looked at her for the first time as if he really saw her. "Good evening, Ayla," he said. His voice was surprisingly even, almost friendly. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, maintaining a professional distance. "Water and the wine list, as usual?" "No," he stopped her. "Tonight I'll trust your choice. Bring me the wine you think would go best with duck breast. And tell me about it." It was a completely unexpected move. He was giving her some control, something he had never done before. Ayla was taken aback for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. She chose a Burgundy wine that was not the most expensive, but very refined. "Pinot Noir from Burgundy," she said, presenting the bottle. "It has a complex aroma with hints of cherry and light earthy tones. It's delicate enough not to overpower the duck, but at the same time, its acidity perfectly balances its richness." He listened attentively, nodding. "Sounds convincing," he said. "Pour it." The rest of the dinner continued in the same vein. He asked her questions, not about work, but about her. "You always wanted to work in a restaurant, Ayla?" he asked casually. "It's a decent job that pays the bills," she replied evasively. "Bills come in all shapes and sizes," he remarked, looking her in the eyes. "Some of them can be overwhelming for one person." Ayla felt a pang of anxiety. He knew something. This conversation was not just small talk. "Any difficulty can be overcome if you have a goal," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is your goal, Ayla?" he asked directly. She looked at him. His face was impenetrable, but deep in his eyes she saw the undisguised interest of a predator studying its prey. "To survive," she replied briefly, "and to help those I care about survive." He smiled again, his quiet, enigmatic smile. "A worthy goal," he said. That evening, he left her a huge tip again, and the next day, he reserved a table again. And the day after that. He came to Elysium every evening for a week, and each time he engaged her in these strange, multi-layered dialogues, trying to find a chink in her armor. The restaurant staff was in shock. Monsieur Legrand followed Ayla around, begging her to tell him what was going on, but she remained silent. She understood that this was a game, and she didn't know the rules. The denouement came a week later. After work, Ayla went to the hospital as usual. She was sitting by Finn's bed when she felt someone's gaze on her. She turned around. Damien Blackwood was standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a simple dark coat without his usual glamour, which made him look even more dangerous. Ayla jumped up, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, trying not to wake her brother. "I came to continue our conversation," he replied quietly, stepping into the room. "You said your goal was to help those you care about survive. I want to help you do that." He stepped closer and placed a platinum credit card on the bedside table. "There's no limit," he said. "Pay for any treatment, at any clinic in the world. Consider it. An investment in your talent. Isla looked at the card, then at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with anger. You found out everything, she said. You dug into my life to find this, to come here and try to buy me. I'm not buying you, Ayla, he replied. I'm offering a solution to your problem. In return, I ask only one thing. Your loyalty. My loyalty isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwood, she said, taking the card and handing it back to him. And neither is my brother's life. We'll manage on our own. Now please leave. You don't belong here. He looked at the card in her hand, then at her unyielding face. And for the first time in his life, Damien Blackwood felt something he had never felt before. Respect. He didn't take the card. Leave it, he said. Just in case. I won't ask about your loyalty. Just know that you have it. Think about it. He turned and left the room as quietly as he had entered, leaving Ayla alone, clutching a piece of plastic that could solve all her problems, but would cost her her soul. The platinum card lay in her dresser drawer, cold and heavy as a tombstone. Ayla didn't touch it. Every morning she looked at it before leaving for work, and every time it was a test of her will. She understood that Damien Blackwood hadn't left her just like that. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill, but another move in his incomprehensible game. He had left her a temptation, knowing that sooner or later circumstances would force her to make a choice, and circumstances did not keep them waiting. A few days later, Finn's attending physician, Dr. Evans, called her in for a serious talk. He was a kind, elderly man who genuinely cared about his patients. Ayla, I have to be honest with you, he began, as they sat in his small office, which smelled of medicine and antiseptic. Standard therapy is no longer working. Finn's condition is slowly but surely deteriorating. We need to move on to more aggressive methods. Ayla felt an icy hand squeeze her heart. What does that mean, doctor? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. It means we need to prepare for a bone marrow transplant, Dr. Evans confirmed. We've started looking for a donor, but it may take some time. And, Ayla, it's a very expensive procedure. Your insurance will only cover a small portion of the costs. How much? She gasped. The doctor named the amount, an amount that seemed astronomical, unreal, an amount she couldn't earn in 10 lifetimes. But there is another option, the doctor continued, seeing the despair on her face. There is an experimental program being conducted by a Swiss pharmaceutical company called Helios Pharma. They have developed a new drug that stimulates the patient's own bone marrow. The results of preliminary trials are very encouraging, but getting into this program is almost impossible. They select patients from all over the world, and the waiting list is huge. But there's a chance, Ayla asked hopefully. There's always a chance, Dr. Evans sighed. I'll submit an application on Finn's behalf. But don't get your hopes up. We need to focus on finding the money for the transplant. This conversation knocked her off her feet. All evening she sat by Finn's bed, who knew nothing of the seriousness of his condition, and laughed at his jokes, while inside she was screaming with helplessness. When she returned home late at night, she took the platinum card out of her dresser. She turned it over in her hands, and that little piece of plastic seemed both her salvation and her curse. She could solve all her problems with one phone call, but the price was too high. Accepting his help meant admitting defeat, becoming his debtor, his property. Damien Blackwood never showed up at the restaurant again. His absence was more noticeable than his presence. Ayla felt as if he was watching her from afar, waiting for her to break down. A week after her conversation with the doctor, when Ayla was on the verge of despair, the doorbell rang. Standing at the door was Julian, Blackwood's impeccable assistant. He was holding an elegant briefcase. "Good evening, Miss Regan," he said in his even voice. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this." He handed her a thin folder made of expensive paper. Ayla took it suspiciously. "What is this?" she asked. "Mr. Blackwood asked that you read the contents," Julian replied. "He will be waiting for your call." He bowed and left without another word. Ayla closed the door and opened the folder with a pounding heart. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was an official letter on Helios Pharma letterhead. The letter stated that a patient named Finnegan Regan had been accepted into an experimental treatment program at their clinic in Zurich. All expenses, including airfare and accommodation, would be covered by the company. Ayla read the letter several times, unable to believe her eyes. It was a miracle, an impossible, unbelievable miracle. but she knew exactly who was responsible for this miracle. At the bottom of the letter, in a corner, was a barely noticeable note. Approved by the board of directors. She knew what she had to do. She took a platinum card out of her drawer with a phone number engraved on the back. She dialed the number. "I'm listening, Ayla," Damian Blackwood's voice answered as if he had been waiting for this call. "Why did you do this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from trembling with emotion. "I told you I wanted to help you achieve your goal," he replied. "I just sped up the process. Helios Pharma recently became part of my corporation. One phone call solved the waiting list problem." "That's not help," she objected. "That's manipulation. You've put me in a position where I can't back out." "Really?" His voice sounded surprised. "You can still refuse. You can throw away this letter and continue looking for money for the transplant. You can leave your brother here in this hospital and hope for the best. The choice, as always, is yours, Ayla. I never take away people's choices. I just make one of the options more attractive." She was silent, unable to find the words. He was the devil, speaking the language of logic and common sense. "What do you want in return?" she finally asked. "I want you to have dinner with me," he replied after a pause. "Not ad Elysium, not as a waitress and a customer, as two people who share common interests. Tomorrow evening. I'll send a car to pick you up." "That's all?" she asked incredulously. "Let's start with that," he said. "And then, as I said, time will tell. See you tomorrow, Ayla." He hung up. Ayla stood in the middle of her small room, clutching the letter that gave her hope in one hand, and the phone that connected her to the man she feared and despised more than anything else in the world in the other. She had fallen into his trap, and now she had to play his game by his rules. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, a black car pulled up outside her modest apartment building. It was so expensive and quiet that it looked like an alien spaceship against the backdrop of old parked cars. Ayla watched it from the window. She had spent the whole day preparing for this dinner. She didn't want to look like a poor relative, but she wasn't going to dress up like she was going to a ball either. She chose a simple but elegant dark blue dress, the only decent one in her wardrobe. It wasn't designer, but it emphasized her slender figure and austere beauty. When she came downstairs, the driver in his immaculate uniform silently opened the rear door for her. The interior of the car was trimmed in light leather and wood and smelled of expensive perfume. The ride was completely silent. The car did not take her to a restaurant, but to the foot of the tallest skyscraper in the city, Blackwood Tower. A private elevator, finished in dark, mirrored glass, silently took her to the top floor, directly to Damian's penthouse. He was waiting for her on a huge terrace with a breathtaking view of the city at night. He was not wearing a formal suit, but a simple cashmere turtleneck and dark trousers. Without his business armor, he looked younger and, oddly enough, even more powerful. "Good evening, Ayla," he said, turning to her. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation." "I didn't really have a choice, did I?" she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. She walked to the edge of the terrace, keeping a safe distance from him. "There is always a choice," he countered. "You could have not come. Then your brother would have had to wait his turn, like everyone else. I would not have done anything. I respect other people's decisions." "You call that respect?" she sneered. "You put me in an impossible situation and call it respect. That's very typical of you, Mr. Blackwood." "Please, call me Damian," he said, approaching a small table set for two. "And no, Ayla, I simply showed you the shortest way to achieve your goal. Isn't that what you wanted?" He pulled out a chair for her. She hesitated for a moment, but then sat down. Dinner had been prepared by a personal chef and served by an inconspicuous butler. Each dish was a masterpiece. But Ayla could hardly taste the food. All her attention was focused on the man sitting across from her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked bluntly when the butler had left. "There are so many people in the world who need help. Why me? Because of a steak?" Damian put down his cutlery and looked at her. "It's not because of the steak," he replied. "It's because of what you said afterwards. You're the only person in the last 10 years who's dared to tell me the truth to my face. Everyone else is either afraid of me or wants something from me. Most of the time it's both." "And you don't want anything from me?" she asked, ironically. "My brother's life, for example." "You want to save your brother?" he corrected her. "But you didn't ask me to. You even refused my money when I offered it to you. That's unusual. People with your problems are usually willing to do anything." "I'm not everything," she snapped. That's what I'm trying to understand, he said, leaning toward her across the table. His voice grew quieter. I've spent my entire life building my empire on one simple principle. Every person has a price. I've learned to determine that price without fail and to pay it. But that principle doesn't work with you. You refused $5,000, even though you needed it. You turned down an unlimited credit card. You intrigue me, Ayla. She looked into his gray eyes and saw not only cold calculation, but something else. Loneliness. The deep, all-consuming loneliness of a man who stands at the top of the world and sees no kindred soul around him. Maybe you've just forgotten how to see anything in people other than price tags, she said quietly. Maybe the problem isn't me, it's you. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something resembling confusion appeared on his face. Maybe, he admitted after a long pause, my father was just like you. He was a simple worker at a steel mill, a man of principles. He believed that pride was more important than money. He died in poverty because he refused to bow down to his bosses, and I swore to myself that I would never be like him. I decided that I would rather be the one who bends than the one who is bent. It was an incredible revelation. He had opened a tiny crack in his armor, revealing what he had hidden from everyone. So, all of this, she said, sweeping her arm across the nighttime cityscape. Your entire empire is built on the fear of becoming like your father. It's built on efficiency, he corrected, becoming cold and collected again. Principles don't pay the bills, Ayla, and they don't save lives. My methods work, they saved your brother. Your money saved my brother, she retorted, not your methods. Money is my main method, he smiled, and I want to offer you a job. I want you to work for me. Ayla froze with the glass in her hand. As what? She asked. A waitress in your penthouse. No, he replied. I have a charitable foundation. It helps hospitals and funds research. It's been around for a long time, but I've never been personally involved. It was just a tax deduction. I want you to run it. She stared at him, unable to believe her ears. You're kidding me, she said. I have no education, no experience. I'm a waitress. You have something that hundreds of people with degrees don't have, he said. You have principles. You know the value of life and the value of money. You're not afraid to speak the truth to the powerful. I need someone like that. I need someone I can trust. Someone who will make sure my money actually goes to help people, not line the pockets of bureaucrats. He handed her his business card across the table. Think about it, he said. The salary won't disappoint you, and you'll be able to save not only your brother but hundreds of other children. It's much more effective than carrying trays at Elysium, don't you think? He stood up, signaling that dinner was over. The car is waiting for you downstairs, he added. I'll be waiting for your decision. He walked back into the penthouse, leaving her alone on the terrace, under the billions of lights of a world that was foreign to her. She held his business card in her hands, and the offer that could change her whole life echoed in her head, and she understood that this was the most sophisticated move in his game. He hadn't bought her. He had offered her a golden cage that would be much harder to escape than poverty. For the next 2 days, Ayla hardly slept. She went to work at the restaurant mechanically, but her thoughts were far away. Damian Blackwood's offer was like a devil's bargain, wrapped in noble intentions. She knew he wasn't doing it out of pure altruism. He had found a way to tie her to him, to make her part of his system, his world. He was giving her power, but that power would be completely dependent on him. She went to the hospital to see Finn. He was unusually animated. The news of the trip to Switzerland had filled him with excitement. Ayla, can you imagine? He said breathlessly. Doctor, Evans said there are mountains and lakes. And chocolate. Real Swiss chocolate. We'll go there together, yes? Of course, together, she smiled, her heart sinking. Where will we get the money? He asked suddenly, with childlike directness. The doctor said it was very expensive. Ayla hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. So someone helped me, she replied. Someone very rich and influential. He heard about our problem and decided to help. Finn frowned. Just like that? He asked incredulously. Does that ever happen? He's not exactly a simple man, Finn, she admitted. He's complicated. And he offered me a job, a very good job, helping other sick children. Wow, the boy's eyes lit up. Like Captain Blake. He helped everyone too. You'll be just like him. That's great. Yes, Ayla said quietly. It'll be great. Her brother's words, his simple, pure joy, made her look at the situation from a different angle. What if she was overcomplicating things? What if this really was a chance? A chance not only to save Finn, but to do something truly important. What did it matter what Damien's true motives were, if the outcome was good? Would she be able to stay true to herself and her principles while inside his system? Or would the system inevitably consume and remake her? That evening, she called him. "I'm in," she said without preamble. "I had no doubt," his calm voice replied. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Julian will meet you at the entrance to Blackwood Tower. Your resignation from Elysium has been arranged. Welcome to the game, Ayla." Her new office was 2 floors below Damien's penthouse. It was a huge, bright space with glass walls offering the same view of the city. Everything was stylish, expensive, and completely impersonal. Julian gave her a brief briefing. "The Blackwood Capital Charity Foundation has been in existence for 5 years," he reported monotonously. "Its annual budget is $100 million. Until today, all of its activities have consisted of writing checks to the organizations listed here. These are mainly large university hospitals and research centers with which the corporation has business interests." He placed a thick folder in front of her. "Mr. Blackwood has instructed me to transfer all authority for the distribution of funds to you," Julian continued. "You can change the list, add new organizations, initiate your own programs. The only condition is that every step you take must be economically justified and aimed at maximum efficiency." "What does he mean by efficiency?" asked Ayla. "The maximum number of lives saved per dollar invested," the assistant replied without a hint of emotion. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't like his money to be wasted. He will expect a monthly report from you. If you have any questions, I am at your disposal." He left her alone in the glass fishbowl. Ayla sat down in a huge leather chair that seemed too big for her. She felt like an imposter, a waitress managing a $100 million fund. It was absurd. She began sorting through the papers. She spent hours studying reports, applications, and financial documents. The world of big charity turned out to be just as cynical as the world of big business. She saw applications from hospitals that spent millions on a new marble lobby, but asked for money for the cheapest equipment. She saw reports where most of the funds went to administrative expenses and management salaries. By the end of the week, 2 new applications had landed on her desk. The first was from the Central Capital Hospital, the most prestigious medical institution in the country. They were asking for $5 million to purchase the latest German tomograph. The application was flawlessly prepared and accompanied by letters of recommendation from senators and businessmen. The chief physician of this hospital was a member of the board of directors of one of Blackwood's companies. The second application was handwritten on a plain sheet of paper. It was a request from a small hospice called Quiet Harbor, located in a poor working-class neighborhood. They were asking for just $100,000 to repair a leaky roof and purchase painkillers for their patients. No recommendations were attached to the application. Ayla knew this was her first test. Damien was testing her. From the point of view of efficiency and PR, a donation to a prestigious hospital was much more advantageous. Photos in newspapers, thank you letters from influential people. The hospice, on the other hand, was a black hole, where money went in with no return. She called both organizations. At the Central Hospital, she was connected to the assistant chief physician, who condescendingly informed her that the doctor was too busy to talk. At the hospice, she was answered by an elderly nurse, whose voice trembled with fatigue. She said that they were on the verge of closing, that they lacked the most basic necessities, and that their patients, mostly elderly people, were living out their last days in the cold and damp. That evening, Ayla went up to Damien's penthouse. He was waiting for her. "I've brought the first report," she said, placing 2 folders on the table in front of him. He silently looked through the documents. "Central Hospital," he said. "Good choice. Dr. Pearson will be pleased. This will strengthen our position on the board of directors of Farm Industries." "That's not what I chose," Ayla interrupted him. "I chose the hospice." Damien slowly raised his eyes to her. There was no anger in them, only cold curiosity. $100,000 for roof repairs, he said, instead of $5 million for equipment that will save hundreds of lives. Are you sure this is an effective use of funds, Ayla? I'm sure we can't let people die in degrading conditions when we can fix it, she replied. Effectiveness isn't measured only in quantity but also in quality, in compassion. You asked me to make sure your money helps. That's what I'm doing. He stared at her for a long time, drumming his fingers on the table. Fine, he finally said. Transfer the money to them, but I want you to personally oversee every cent that is spent. Go there tomorrow, and give me a full report with photos. I want to see what my ineffective investment went to. Ayla nodded. It will be done, she said. She had won this round. But as she left his penthouse, she knew he hadn't backed down. He had simply raised the stakes. He was forcing her deeper into his world, binding her to him with invisible threads of debt and responsibility. The Quiet Harbor Hospice was located in a part of town where Damien Blackwood's black sedans never ventured. The old brick building was surrounded by cracked asphalt and bare trees. Ayla arrived there the next day in a simple city taxi. When she entered, she was enveloped by the smell of old age, illness, and disinfectants. But through it all, she could smell something else, the smell of freshly baked bread. She was greeted by the same elderly nurse she had spoken to on the phone. Her name was Martha, and she had the kindest, most tired eyes Ayla had ever seen. Miss Regan, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. We didn't dare hope. Please come in. I'm sorry for the mess. Ayla walked through the corridors. The paint on the walls was peeling. There were dark patches of damp in the corners, and water was dripping from the ceiling into buckets in several places. But at the same time, everything was immaculately clean. The beds in the wards were neatly made with old but clean sheets. On the bedside tables stood modest bouquets of wildflowers. We only have 10 wards, Martha said quietly, and 22 patients. We try our best, but we don't have enough staff, and the building is falling apart. It's terribly cold here in winter. She led Ayla into a small kitchen, from which the smell of bread wafted. This is our volunteer, Mrs. Pettigrew, Martha introduced a little old lady who was kneading dough. She comes every day and bakes bread for our residents. She says the smell of home helps them feel better. Ayla talked to the patients. They were lonely old people who had been abandoned by their relatives, people in the final stages of terminal illnesses. They didn't complain. They were grateful for the slightest sign of care. An old sailor with tattoos on his gnarled hands told her about his travels, and a former music teacher asked her to read her some poetry. You are like an angel, my child, she said to Ayla when she finished reading. God himself sent you to us. Ayla spent the whole day at the hospice. She photographed not only the leaky roof and old equipment, but also the faces of the people, their hands, their eyes. She realized that this place was not about death. It was about dignity, about the human right to leave this life in warmth, without pain, and surrounded by care. In the evening, she returned to her glass office in Blackwood Tower. She felt as if she had been to another planet. She prepared her report. It was not a dry financial document. It was a story about the Quiet Harbor and its inhabitants. She took the report to Damien. He was sitting at his huge desk, as always, looking out over the city lights. He silently took the folder and began to leaf through it, his face impassive. He looked at the photos for a long time. You spent the whole day on this, he finally said, without looking up from the photo of the old teacher holding Ayla's hand. I had to see it with my own eyes, she replied. You wanted me to? I wanted an expense report, not a sentimental photo album, he said, but his voice lacked its usual harshness. $100,000, roof, medicine, new clothes. What next? In a year, they'll need more money. It's a never-ending pit. It's not efficient. Maybe, Ayla agreed, but these people will die warm and pain-free. To me, that's the most efficient investment there is, and I think your father would be proud of that decision. She hadn't expected herself to say that. She had struck him where he hurt most, in his past. Damien looked up at her sharply. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, but then it was replaced by something else, something like pain. "Ah, don't you dare talk about my father," he said quietly but firmly. "Why not?" she persisted. "Because he reminds you that there are things that money can't buy. Honor, compassion, dignity." They stared at each other in a tense silence. It was the most dangerous moment in their relationship. She had crossed the line. "You're fired," he said in an icy tone. Ayla nodded. She had expected this. "Fine," she said, turning to leave. "Stop," he ordered. She froze at the door, her back to him. Tomorrow morning, I want to see a plan for the complete renovation of this hospice on my desk, he continued in his usual commanding voice, and a program to recruit the best palliative care doctors. The budget is unlimited, and find this, Mrs. Pettigrew. The foundation will provide her with flour and yeast for the rest of her life. That's all. You can go. Isla slowly turned around. She didn't understand what was happening. But you said, she began. I said you're fired from your position as head of the foundation that tries to please me, he interrupted, and hired as the head of a foundation that does what it thinks is right. Now go. You have a lot of work to do. She left his penthouse, and for the first time in all the time she had known him, she felt not fear or anger, but a deep, overwhelming bewilderment. This man was not just a monster, he was much more complex and dangerous. He was a man capable of compassion, but hiding it behind a wall of cynicism and cruelty. And she was beginning to understand that her job here was not just about distributing money. Her job was to try to reach a man locked in a golden tower. The next month flew by like a single day. Ayla threw herself into her work. The renovation project for the Quiet Harbor Hospice became her brainchild. She found the best architects, who agreed to work for a minimal fee, inspired by her story. She personally supervised the builders and chose the furniture and equipment. She made sure that each ward had not just a new bed, but a comfortable, bright, and cozy space. Damien did not interfere. He silently approved all her bills and read her detailed reports. They hardly saw each other, communicating mainly through Julian or by email. But Ayla constantly felt his invisible presence. He gave her freedom, but that freedom was like a long leash. Meanwhile, all the documents for Finn's trip to Switzerland were ready. The departure date was set for 2 weeks later. Ayla lived in a state of constant stress and hope. She was torn between her work at the foundation, caring for her brother, and her complicated, unspoken relationship with Damien. One evening, as she sat in her office working on her latest project, she received a call on her personal cell phone from Zurich. It was Professor Schneider, the head of the Helios Pharma Clinic. Miss Reagan, I have some bad news for you, he said in perfect English with a slight German accent. Isla's heart sank. Something's wrong with the program, she asked, her voice trembling. The program is fine, the professor replied, but there have been unforeseen circumstances. One of our key investors, the Japanese corporation Kyoto Pharmaceuticals, has protested against your brother being included in the program out of turn. They are threatening to withdraw their investment if we do not strictly adhere to the official waiting list. But Mr. Blackwood settled everything, Ayla said, confused. Mr. Blackwood is our largest shareholder, that is true, Professor Schneider confirmed. But Kyoto Pharmaceuticals controls the Asian market, and we can't risk severing our relationship with them. The board of directors is in an emergency meeting right now. I'm afraid the decision will not be in your favor. I'm very sorry. When she hung up the phone, she felt as if her world had collapsed. All her hopes, all her efforts, all gone to waste because of some corporate wars. She sat in her luxurious office and cried in helplessness. At that moment, the door opened silently and Damien entered. He rarely came down to her floor. Seeing her state, he frowned. What happened? He asked curtly. Sobbing, she told him about the call from Zurich. He listened silently, his face expressionless. When she finished, he simply walked over to her phone on her desk and dialed a number. Julian, he said into the receiver, I need a full report on Kyoto Pharmaceuticals, all their assets, all their transactions over the last 5 years, all their vulnerabilities. You have an hour. He hung up and looked at Isla. Stop crying, he said. Not exactly gently, but without his usual coldness. It's not effective. Tears don't solve problems. Actions do. He sat down in the chair opposite her and waited. Exactly 1 hour later, Julian entered the office with a tablet in his hands. They're trying to secure a major contract to supply equipment to the Euromed network of European clinics, he reported. We are a shadow co-owner of this network through our subsidiary fund in Luxembourg. If we block the deal, they will lose hundreds of millions. Damien nodded as if he had heard exactly what he expected. Connect me to Mr. Tanaka, he ordered. A minute later, the voice of the head of Kyoto Pharmaceuticals came over the speakerphone. Blackwood-san, what an honor, said a polite voice with a strong Japanese accent. Tanaka-san, let's not waste time on pleasantries, Damien cut him off. I have been informed that you are putting obstacles in the way of my project at Helios Pharma. I would like to understand why. It's a matter of principle, Mr. Blackwood, replied the Japanese man. The rules must be the same for everyone. I am also a man of principles, Mr. Tanaka, said Damien, his voice sounding like the rustling of steel. And my main principle is, don't interfere with my business and my people's. Consider the boy my personal project. If Professor Schneider does not receive confirmation from you within 10 minutes that all questions have been resolved, I will personally see to it that your contract with Euromed is reduced to dust. Do you understand me? There was silence on the line for a few seconds. You've left me no choice, Blackwood-san, Tanaka finally said. There is always a choice, Damien replied, quoting his own words to Ayla. You just chose the one that will keep your money. Good day. He hung up. Silence fell again in the office. Ayla stared at him with wide eyes. She had just witnessed him destroy and outmaneuver a powerful corporation in a matter of minutes. She had seen him in action, seen the ruthless power that everyone feared so much, but now that power was directed at protecting her. Thank you, she whispered. He stood up and walked over to the window. Don't thank me, he said, looking out at the city. I was protecting my investment. You work for me. Your brother is now part of my project, and I don't tolerate interference with my projects. He was talking about business, about investments, about efficiency. But for the first time, Ayla heard something else in his voice. He wasn't just protecting an asset. He was protecting her. And that scared her much more than all his previous manipulations, because she realized that the wall she had so carefully built against him was beginning to crack. The day before her flight to Zurich, Ayla was working in her office when Julian informed her that she had a visitor. She wasn't expecting anyone. An elegant middle-aged man with gray hair at his temples and piercing eyes entered the office. Miss Ayla Reagan, he said with a polite smile. My name is Silas Thorne. I am a long-time, shall we say, business partner of Mr. Blackwood. Ayla tensed. The name Silas Thorne was well known in financial circles. He was the only person in town who wasn't afraid to openly oppose Damien, and their feud was legendary. How can I help you, Mr. Thorne? She asked, maintaining her outward calm. Oh, I've come to help you, he said, sitting down in a chair without invitation. I admire your work with the hospice, and I've heard about your situation with your brother. Damien, of course, played it all out perfectly. A real savior. If you've come to talk in riddles, you're wasting your time, Ayla snapped. No riddles, Thorne smiled. Just facts. You seem to like facts. You know how Damien Blackwood made his first really big fortune? How his empire began? Ayla was silent. He destroyed a small but very promising engineering company, Silas continued, looking intently into her eyes. He ruined its owner by buying up his patents for a song. It was his trademark style, cruel and effective. The owner of that company was Robert Regan. Ayla gasped. Robert Regan. That was her father's name. He had died of a heart attack 10 years ago, right after his firm went bankrupt. She was only 16 at the time. You're lying, she whispered. I never lie when it comes to Damien, said Thorne, standing up. He placed an old newspaper clipping on the table. The yellowed photo showed two people, a young and unknown Damien Blackwood and her father, shaking hands as they signed some kind of contract. He didn't just help you. He's paying for his sins with your hands. He's making you a symbol of his hypocritical mercy. Think about it, Miss Regan. Think about whose hand you're accepting. He left, leaving her alone with this terrible truth. Her world collapsed for the second time in 2 days. The man who had saved her brother turned out to be the monster who had destroyed her father. All his help, his strange attention, his talk about her father, all of it took on a new, sinister meaning. She didn't go home. She went up to the penthouse. She entered without knocking. Damien was sitting in a chair on the terrace, looking out at the city. It's true, she asked, throwing a newspaper clipping on the table in front of him. My father, it's true. He looked at the photo, his face unmoving. Yes, he replied, it's true. His calmness was monstrous. You knew, she breathed. All this time you knew who I was, and you played with me? I only found out who you were when Julian brought me the report, he said. It was an ironic coincidence. Coincidence! She shouted, losing control for the first time. You destroyed him. He put his whole life into this company. You took everything from him. He died a month after you ruined him. You killed him. I didn't kill him, Damien said in an icy tone, standing up. I beat him in a fair business fight. He was a weak player, Ayla. He trusted people at their word. He didn't read the contracts he signed. The business world is cruel. The strongest survive. Your father was a dreamer, not a fighter. I taught him that lesson. Apparently, you learned it much better. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears of rage and helplessness. And now you want me to work for you, she whispered. So I can take your dirty money and save others with it, forgetting what you did to my family? I want you to be pragmatic, he replied, coming close to her. Your father is dead. He's not coming back. But your brother is alive, and he will live thanks to my money and your principles. What is more important to you, Ayla? Revenge for the past or life in the present? The choice, as always, is yours. He stood so close that she could feel the cold emanating from him, and she knew that this was the culmination of their game. He had put everything on the line, revealing all his cards. Now it was her move. Ayla looked into his cold, confident eyes and felt two storms raging inside her. Hatred for the man who had broken her father, and desperate gratitude to the man who had saved her brother. She could have hit him, cursed him, walked away, slamming the door behind her. But she remembered her father's words, which he had often repeated to her. Don't let anger make decisions for you. She took a step back, creating some distance. Her tears dried, leaving behind a cold, clear determination. You're right, she said, her voice as hard as steel. The choice is mine, and I've made it. Damien waited silently, his face impenetrable. I'm flying to Zurich with my brother, she continued. I'll accept your help because his life is more important to me than my pride and my hatred for you. But that's where it ends. What do you mean? He asked. I mean that I no longer work for you, she said sharply. I'll come back as soon as Finn is safe, and I'll pay you back every cent you spent on his treatment. I'll set up a payment plan. It may take me my whole life, but I'll pay off this debt. I won't be your investment, your project, or your redemption. I'll be your debtor, and only that. She looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time he saw in her gaze not a challenge, but a final sentence. She wasn't playing by his rules. She had created her own. Damien was silent for a long time. He walked to the edge of the terrace and looked down at the city that lay at his feet. The city he had conquered, but in which he was completely alone. He had always won. But now, for the first time, victory seemed like defeat. He could have forced her to stay, pressured her, threatened her. But he knew that then he would lose the only person who saw him, not as a millionaire, but simply as Damien. Your father wasn't just a dreamer, he said quietly without turning around. He was a decent man. Too decent for this business. After his company went bankrupt, I offered him a position in my corporation, with triple the salary. He refused. Ayla listened, holding her breath. She had never known this. He told me, Damien continued, and there was a note in his voice she had never heard before, a note of deep-seated bitterness. He said, I'd rather die in poverty than work for a man without honor. He was wrong. Honor didn't save him. But I've never been able to forget his words. He turned and looked at her. His armor cracked. I accept your terms, Ayla, he said. You owe me nothing. Consider it my debt to him. No, she said firmly. It will be my debt, and I will decide when it is paid. Goodbye, Damien. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the top of his world. She didn't know what would happen next. She knew only one thing. She was no longer a pawn in his game. She had become a player, and she had just made her first move. A year passed. Ayla stood in the sun-drenched hall of the completely renovated Quiet Harbor Hospice. It was now called the Robert Regan Palliative Care Center. Standing next to her was Finn, noticeably taller and stronger, after a year of successful treatment in Switzerland. He held a pair of scissors with a large red ribbon in his hands. Are you ready? He asked, smiling at his sister. Ready, she nodded. To the applause of the small crowd of guests, staff, and patients, Finn cut the ribbon, officially opening the center. Ayla gave a short speech, thanking everyone who had helped. She did not mention Damien Blackwood's name. When the official part was over, she saw him. He was standing off to the side, near the entrance, dressed in a simple, dark coat. He didn't come closer, just watched. Ayla walked over to him. You came after all, she said. I couldn't miss the opening of such an effective project, he replied. There was a slight, unfamiliar smile on his face. And I wanted to give you this. He handed her a folder. Inside was a single document. It was a deed of gift transferring 100% of the shares of the Blackwood Capital Charity Foundation to an independent board of trustees headed by Ayla Regan. She looked at the document, then at him. "I don't understand," she said. "Why?" "I realized you were right," he said, looking at the sign with her father's name on it. "There are some things that money can't buy, and there are debts that money can't repay. This fund is now yours, completely. Do with it what you think is right, without my reports and my control." "What will you do?" she asked. He paused for a moment. "I'll try to learn to live in a world where not everything has a price tag. It won't be easy. I may need a good counselor." He looked into her eyes, and there was no longer any coldness in his gaze, only a question. "I'll think about your offer," Ayla replied, and for the first time since they had met, she smiled at him sincerely. "But my services are very expensive, and I don't accept payment in money." He nodded, accepting her new rules. Their game wasn't over. It had simply moved to a whole new level, where there were no winners or losers. There were just two people who had been given the chance to start with a clean slate.